What's up, everybody? This is Connor Allen, sports betting and high stakes manager at 4for4. And joining me today for another special FFPC Playoff Challenge show is John Paulson, man behind all of our projections, one of the godfathers of 4for4. Paulson, Packers not only won outright, they dominated the Dallas Cowboys. You get to clown our CEO, Reed. You get to clown your frenemy, Ryan Noonan. I mean, was this like the best week of your life or what?
It was pretty great. Sitting there watching the game with my wife, just as things were unfolding in the first half, we're just looking at each other like, as a fan of a team that really doesn't have much expectations in a particular game, going in and playing a team that's won 16 straight at home, you're just hoping that you don't get embarrassed. And we went from that to we're going to win this, and then we went to we're not just going to win it, we're going to beat them by 20. So it was a lot of disbelief, and a couple hairy moments at the end when they pulled their starters maybe a little early. But it got a little scary. I lived through the Seattle game in the playoffs when they were ready to go to the Super Bowl, and everything that went wrong, everything that could go wrong went wrong. So I was like, don't pull your starters with 5.5 minutes left. Don't do that. But they pulled it out.
Crazy. Yeah, it was wild. I mean, I can't believe that they pulled their starters so early. But when I knew the game was over was when I think it was maybe in the early third quarter when the Packers were like, all right, we're having a lot of success running the ball. We're just going to load up 12 personnel and just run the ball down their throats. And Dallas just they had no answer. Like they didn't load the box. They were not trying to put in their big guys. They were just like, oh, you know what? We're just going to play like how we normally do, which in my mind is a massive red flag for this Cowboys team. And, for that point, I'm like, oh, this is over. If they're able to run the ball, the Cowboys have no shot of coming back too, because like you said, you brought it up on the show last week, Joe Barry's defense shows up in random moments, and they did good enough for, at least the first half long enough to give the Packers the win, right?
Yeah, the interceptions were huge. To steal a possession, flip the field position, and the Jair's interception was incredible. And yeah, nice to see him out there. Hopefully he can play this week, but we'll talk about that matchup here, I'm sure, in the next hour.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. And before we dive in, just want to remind everyone, if your fantasy football season is over, we are still doing betting content, still doing DFS content, all of my player prop bets, all of TJ's DFS work, Noonan's tackle props. You can get in the action. It's just like $20 from now to the Super Bowl. Even people betting a couple bucks, I'm sure you'll make more than that just hanging out in the Discord. So definitely will be worth it. Plus, you get to, have access to us whenever you want in our Discord. Go to 4for4.com/plans and you can find us there. So before we dive into our strategy this week, I think we should recap our teams from last week, maybe look at some of our things we got right, some of the stuff that we got wrong. And I'll let you kick it off here if you want to look at, I guess you did one team, I did two teams. I didn't end up doing any more, and I'm kind of happy for that because, well, I don't know, actually. I felt pretty strong about some of the takes we had, but I played a couple of things pretty wrong. But I think your biggest play and your biggest, flag plant was playing Aaron Jones in this game. And I think it's giving you massive leverage on your team.
Yeah, I would really be sitting pretty if I had made one other decision. We talked briefly about it in Slack, but I have Lamar Jackson at quarterback, McCaffrey and Pacheco at running back, Lamb and Nico Collins at receiver, Jones at flex with Cook, James Cook, Cooper Kupp, Amon-Ra St. Brown, David Njoku at tight end, Jake Elliott at kicker, and then Tampa Bay defense. And I soft faded both teams in that one game, and it's very probably not recommended, but I just could not bring myself to bench any of my skill players for a player in that game because I have so low confidence in them winning a second game. I guess that was my reasoning on it. But I had for part of the week, I had Puka Nacua instead of Cooper Kupp, and then I pulled the splits with the two of them playing together, and they were pretty close. I mean, Kupp had been right there with Puka for the stretch that he was healthy, and I thought maybe it was a leverage play, and if I had played Puka, I think I'd be really sitting pretty in this one. But what do you think my chances are of having a decent finish with this lineup at this point?
Yeah, I think it's pretty strong. And what place are you in right now? Do you know off the top? Because I'm starting to look through
2,500, something like that.
Oh, 2,500. Okay, wow. So
yeah.
Both of my teams are ahead of yours, actually. So this is interesting. So I have a team that's in 323rd, which is pretty wild. I went with I honestly don't even remember this. I have Puka in this lineup, so that's massive. I had Josh Allen, McCaffrey, Pacheco, CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra, Puka, Amari, dead. Obviously, that stinks. Tyreek Hill, also dead. But I have Nico, and then Dallas Goedert, also dead. Justin Tucker. I went with the Baltimore fade. I put Justin Tucker instead of any of the Baltimore players. So, and then Tampa Bay defense. So it's one of those things where I went super risky. I probably didn't need to. We talked about in the last show. There's only, I think, what was 7,800 people total in the contest. But, so far it can work. I think that I was in a pretty similar spot when me and Pano won this thing a while ago. And we just had a couple of different pivots with Raheem Mostert over George Kittle a couple of years ago. But I don't know. I probably have too many dead players to actually win. I think I like your lineups. It's is better, kind of going forward here, especially with the Baltimore game. I think the Baltimore's game is going to be a big decision point for us. We'll talk about it here a little bit more. Anything else, you kind of learned from last round or something that you want to carry over to this one, or do you want to kind of dive into the team by team stuff?
Let's just go ahead and dive in.
Awesome. Cool. So real quick off the top here, how this is different from the last round. You start only 8 players, so you get 1 from each team, and no kickers, no defenses. So 1 QB, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, 1 tight end, and 2 flexes. Honestly, I like this way better than the last one. Hate kickers, hate defenses, hate having to choose which teams to fade, especially with so many teams in the close spread. Sorry, you got something to add here?
This is the actual challenge that you won before.
It was. Yeah, it was
the playoff challenge too. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, this is the playoff challenge that Pano and I won a couple of years ago in the playoffs. And I don't know. I maybe it's just the kicker defense thing throwing me off, but I haven't had a ton of luck in the first rounds, and then the second rounds I usually do pretty well. We got some to push back in the chat here. No kickers. That's BS from Jeff. I know Jeff's a big kicker guy, and then Jen said she faded Green Bay. Never fade Paulson. I think that's kind of the rule here, especially with Green Bay.
I couldn't bring myself to fade Green Bay, so that was a tough call. But I thought Aaron Jones had a chance to have a big game, and then also they had a chance to win that one, which they did. So happy about that. We'll see how it goes.
Awesome. Yeah. So I think let's start with that game. So let's start with the 49ers. I think last week we talked about on the show how we were basically just like lock buttoning CMC. I kind of think that's still the same here. Do you have anything else to change? Kittle, the matchup. So I will say, I want to add here real quick. The Packers, something the Cowboys did not take advantage of, and they started to in the second half, is passes on first down against the Packers. Against passes on first down, the Packers are 26th in success rate, 28th in yards per play. They're out, allowing a ton of yards on first down and passes. And a lot of this is because they don't really shift their scheme. So it's like, they play the run on first down and they play the pass second, third down. And we're looking at a spot here where the 49ers lead the league in passing yards on first down. They lead the league 11.1 yards per attempt on first down. It matches up perfectly that if Shanahan wants to emphasize this edge, I think they'll be able to and have success passing the ball. And the Packers have really struggled to defend over the ball over the middle. And I think that matters too for this 49ers team with Debo, CMC, Kittle, who are all very capable of eating over the middle. So, I'm definitely not counting the Packers out. I think they'll be able to score on their own end, which we'll get to in a second. But this matchup, I guess, specifically makes me somewhat more interested in maybe playing like Kittle for some reason instead of CMC. But I'm curious where your head's at here. I guess it's still like almost all CMC, I would say. But I don't know. I could consider playing someone else.
I think wouldn't it come down to how far you think San Francisco is going to go? Do you think they're going to win the game? Are they going to play the 3 games? Because, if you're taking a Kittle or a Debo or something, maybe you're thinking 1 or 2 games because, really likely that CMC is going to outscore everybody on this team if he plays 3 games, I would think, right?
Yeah, that's the issue that you run into. It's like, could Kittle, could Ayuk, could Debo outscore CMC in a 1-game sample? 100%. But with all of them 3 being healthy, we've noticed I would say volatile production from all of them, right? So I guess that's a good point that over a 3-game sample, the odds of any of them outscoring CMC over that sample is, I don't know, really slim, I would say.
But if you want to take a stand, if you think San Francisco's vulnerable either in this game or in the next game, it might make sense to go with one of these other players because, maybe in a 1 or 2 game sample, they'll pay off.
Yeah, I think kind of given what we're looking at with the NFC landscape here, with the Packers beating the Cowboys, with the Bucs beating the Eagles, and with the Lions winning. The Lions, in my mind, are the second best team here left. And I still think the Niners are a good bit better than this Lions team. And I also think that I was talking about this on another show. If the Bucs somehow beat the Lions, which I actually think that they match up, relatively well, all things considered, I mean, the Niners might be like 13-point favorites at home against the Bucks. I mean, which again just screams more CMC. That would be pretty wild. So I think we probably have come to a conclusion here. It's probably CMC for the Niners. Let's move over to your Packers, though. Are you smashing Aaron Jones again? Any interest in Romeo Dobbs or Jaden Reed? How are you approaching it?
I would go with Jones because I disagree with you a little bit. I think the Packers right now are playing at a higher level than the Lions, and they've already went into Detroit and beat the Lions on Thanksgiving. And I think if they are able to somehow win this game, they have a pretty good shot at making the Super Bowl. So I'm going to go with the player I think that has the best chance of scoring the most points on this team in 3 games. You could argue that should be Jordan Love, but I don't feel strongly enough about them beating the 49ers to use him as my quarterback. So definitely Jones for me. The tough thing about the Packers is using any of these other players is that you don't know which receiver is going to show up in any given week. I mean, it's like whack-a-mole, and I think we're going to get to a Prize Picks play where you're liking one of the other receivers to bounce back from a quiet game against Dallas. I agree with that. It's hard to predict which one of these receivers. And certainly in a 3-game sample, it's really hard to see any of them outscoring Jones, given that the Packers are finally using Jones the way fantasy managers want them to use him during the regular season. But they don't do it because they want to keep him healthy, and they want to save him for moments like this where they need him for 20 plus carries or 20 plus touches at least. And I think this is a decent matchup for him. I don't think the 49ers defense is quite as good as people think. Maybe there's a couple of vulnerabilities there, and I think he can get there through the air as well. So yeah, I'm going to go with Jones in this one. I think he's a pretty clear pick as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because the 49ers run defense is, I think, 20th in rushing success rate at this point, which is not very good. The Cowboys entering last week were dead last in rushing success rate allowed. But, I had a little bit more faith that they'd figure something out. They did not figure anything out. In fact, they just played right into the Packers' hands. This week is interesting because we saw the Packers last week go heavy 12 personnel, which is, 2 wide receivers. And they're played a little bit heavier sets with more tight ends. They absolutely dominated the Cowboys. Now, against 12 personnel, the 49ers run defense has been very good. So they're like top 5 in basically every metric. And I think that that's an important distinction, that if the Packers are able to get going, it's just probably not going to look the same on the ground as it did in previous weeks. But that being said, as you mentioned, Aaron Jones' role is awesome. He's seeing a ton of work in the passing game. He has massive touchdown equity if they get near the goal line, which I think they will. I think it's going to look different, but I think they will get close to the goal line. So he's going to score touchdowns. He's going to catch passes. And that's a massive thing for fantasy, obviously, here. So it's tough to not put him in there. If you do go elsewhere, I think you can make a case for a guy like Jaden Reed. We, talked about there a little bit with a guy who could bounce back with 12 personnel. Jaden Reed almost always plays in the slot. If you have 2 wide receivers on the field, there's no slot receiver. They haven't really transitioned him to a full-time outside receiver. So even though he's super talented, I think he sees a little bit more run in this game. I think that would be my leverage play here potentially. I haven't seen any ownership projections, by the way. Have you looked at anything? I tried looking, and I guess no one cares anymore. There's still money to be made.
I saw somebody ask Pat Crane if he was going to do them. He's like, no, I usually only do the 1 week. So we have to kind of go off of that. I think maybe the actuals are the best, gauge right now as to what people chose in the first round.
Yeah, most likely. I think that makes sense. So yeah, it's I think, I'm interested to see where that comes in. I think I would guess Aaron Jones would be the highest owned after he dropped, 30 points, 40 points. It was like an insane game. So yeah, shout out to you for having him in your first lineup and, kind of sticking with your guns there. I think that's will probably prove to be pretty fruitful for you going forward. Anything else in this game before we move on to the next one?
No, I don't think so.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's move on to, let's see here. I think we'll stay with Saturday. Texans Ravens is pretty interesting. So let's start with the Texans here. Absolutely crushed the Browns. So much to the point that we didn't even need to see a full CJ Stroud. So much so that he didn't even need to pass the ball, but he was having a ton of success doing so when he did against a Browns defense that's among the best in the league here. And now we have the matching up against the Ravens here. The Ravens will be without their top cornerback, Marlon Humphrey. They play a ton of zone. Against zone, CJ Stroud is completing around 70% of his passes, 12 to 2 touchdown interception ratio, like averaging over 8 yards per attempt, has been, stellar. He doesn't have his full array of weapons without Tank Dell, but still has Nico Collins, Dalton Schultz, Brevin Jordan. We'll have, I think we saw Mechie and Xavier Hutchinson kind of step up a little bit here. So I'm kind of interested in this Texans team. I did play some plus 9.5 here for them. And I know this isn't a betting show, but I do think that matters. If you think that this team can stick around versus not stick around at all. So I think that Nico is awesome play, but he'll probably be super highly owned.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can get to CJ Stroud because there are so many other good quarterbacks, but any thoughts here on the Texans?
On the Texans, I'm thinking Nico, but it's very chalky at this point, given, he played well in the first game, and there isn't not a whole other a lot of options in this offense. You could go Stroud, but as you mentioned, you probably want a quarterback that's going to play in the Super Bowl, and they would be pretty big dogs, I think, if they're playing at Kansas City or Buffalo if they happen to win this game. Dalton Schultz, but he didn't. If it was a Jake Ferguson type game, he was coming off of 2 or 3 touchdowns, maybe you could talk yourself into Dalton Schultz, but that'd be a little bit tougher for me. Devin Singletary, the Ravens have a pretty good rush defense. I don't know that he's going to have a ton of success either. So for me, it's really Nico Collins, lock him in the lineup and then try to find your variation elsewhere.
Yeah, and I think we've got a good question here in the chat. 100% agree with CMC and Jones, assuming you'll be recommending Lamar Jackson now as QB. But like, what point do we get unique here to differentiate? Maybe we talk about this at the end here after we go team by team. But I think that there will be, some more spots to differentiate. And I mean, maybe it's with the Ravens here. And I think that that's kind of one of those things is like, if you're not playing Lamar, who do you play? No Mark Andrews just announced out. Are you interested in Zay Flowers? I mean, Odell Beckham, there's been a kind of narrative street thing on Twitter this week of like they were saving him for the playoffs. He could, anytime he's played and played more, he's been awesome, to be honest. But like he's so fragile that I think that they haven't really been playing him much, doing like a 4 wide receiver rotation. If he does play more, I think he's somewhat viable, but I'm just a little bit skeptical of playing anyone other than Lamar here.
I agree. And I would only not play Lamar if you think that Baltimore is going to lose this game, or has a real shot to lose this game. So I think in your position, if you think that you told me in Slack that you think that the Ravens might lose this one, there's a good chance.
I do. And let me defend myself real quick on that. So a couple things here. So I already talked about how the Texans might have some success against the Ravens. The Ravens run defense also is like, bottom 10 or so in run defense success rate. They're not like some world beater on the ground, which I think matters for the Texans too, to kind of be able to set up the pass a little bit. On the other side though, this Texans defense, shout out to Noonan, by the way, pointing to this article that they did at PFF. Basically, they were the second half of last week, they were rotating their safeties post snap and like basically playing all these unique formations that confused Flacco and led to multiple picks. And I don't think they're super good. Like the Texans don't have a good defense, but D'Amico Ryans and that kind of defense there are able to, I think, maybe confuse Lamar enough that it matters. Also, their run defense is awesome. Run defense, first in rushing success rate allowed. Against RPOs, 2.7 yards per carry. Against runs out of the gun, 3.9 yards per carry, which is first. So like all of these things that the Ravens do well offensively, the Texans are kind of equipped to handle on the ground. And then if they can, they're not going to be good on a play-to-play basis on the secondary. But from like the confusion standpoint of maybe they get a pick, maybe they cause havoc, I think that's possible. So again, I am 100% the contrarian here. The market is 10. This is one of the most liquid markets that you'll find in sports betting. And there are, millions of dollars telling me that I'm wrong. But I think there's also plenty of people who are agreeing that I'm right. So that's kind of my hot take there. And I played a lineup accordingly. I'm going with someone that's not Lamar. But that being said, if you think that the Ravens win, you have to play Lamar.
I just wanted to piggyback on what you said about the Ravens rush defense. I said that they were pretty good. They're 109 yards per game allowed, which is middle of the pack. 4.5 yards per carry, which is high, but they've only given up 6 rushing touchdowns. So that's kind of my, that's my anti Devin Singletary take. Cause I was thinking from a fantasy points per, game standpoint. I don't know where else to go other than Lamar though. Like the whole Mark Andrews thing, if he was playing, you could make the case there, but you don't like, if you go Zay Flowers, and I think you really need them to lose. Zay Flowers or Gus Edwards or Justice Hill or an Odell or something, or an Isaiah Likely. You need them to lose. So that's your only play, because I think, it's just so unlikely that if they play 2 or 3 games, anybody's going to outscore Lamar. And he's, if they win, he's going to do well. So.
Yeah, totally agree. And that's definitely a concern. So if you're firing multiple lineups, I will have one just kind of fading. I had Andrews in there. And so obviously I'm kind of shifting this around right now. For now, I'll probably put Likely. I think the matchup's good. We talked about it briefly before here, but, average 58 yards per game without Mark Andrews, not including the week 18. Yeah, week 18 game where the starters kind of played. They were like in and out. He had 80% plus route participation weeks 11 through 17. So super involved, seeing a ton of targets, was crushing there. So I think that that's kind of a unique angle specifically, but again, it's pretty thin, but you got to find a way to differentiate a little bit. So that's kind of one of the ways that I like to. All right, I think we touched on most of the Texans and Ravens stuff here. Anything else from you there?
No, let's move on to Sunday.
Cool. All right, Bucks Lions. We'll start with the Bucks team here. This is really interesting for me because the Lions, since their week 9 bye, are allowing 299 passing yards per game. They're 30th in passing success rate allowed, dead last in EPA per play allowed. They're a little bit healthier than they were during that time, which I think could make a difference. CJ Gardner-Johnson kind of came back late, but I don't know. They're still not that good. I mean, like they're allowing like Nick Mullins and people to throw for 350, 400 yards. I think they're fine at best. But then you have them matching up against the Bucks team with Baker Mayfield, who's been playing some of the best football of his career. Mike Evans, who had multiple drops, but could have easily had 120 yards and multiple touchdowns. And then, Chris Godwin's kind of being more involved. You have the ghost of David Moore coming out of nowhere to run some meaningful routes, and Trey Palmer still there too. Like, I don't know. I think that they kind of have some success passing the ball here specifically. Like, I think Mike Evans, Chris Godwin are both very live, but Rachaad White could catch like 7 or 8 balls here too, because we've seen Dave Canales skew a little bit more pass heavy against teams that have bad pass defenses and good run defenses, which is exactly what the Lions have. So is your head kind of in the same place here? I'm interested to hear where you're at with the Bucks.
Yeah, so I think that the Sunday games are where we can get some variation if you kind of go chalky on Saturday with Lamar Jackson, CMC, Jones, and who was the fourth? Oh, Nico Collins. So if you happen to pick those 4 and don't want to pick anybody else, maybe you take the second or third option, less chalky options for these other games, and you can get a kind of a different lineup that way. I think specifically for the Bucks, Evans is probably the chalk. He was the chalk in round 1. He didn't have that great of a game, 40-something yards, even though Baker, I think I texted you, Baker had three something, and then
Literally,
Evans and Godwin both under 50 yards passing, which is just crazy. I mean, this game sets up really well for the Bucks passing game. So if you don't want to go Evans, who obviously has the most upside, Godwin is interesting as the number 2 option. Even Cade Otton coming off the huge game, you could maybe roll him out there if you really want to get risky in a 1-game sample in tight end premium. He might get you there. I mean, a 7 for 100 or something might be the highest scoring player on this team. I think Rachaad White is actually kind of a sneaky play based on the matchup. I mean, the Lions are tough against the run, but he does catch passes. So if they do, throw him 4 or 5, 6 passes, he's going to rack up some points as well. And he's not going to be the chalk, I don't think. He was only 20% owned in the first game, the first round, and Mike Evans was 40 plus. So that's where I think I would probably go as one of these. If you want to kind of differentiate, go with Godwin, White, probably White, but Godwin would be even sneakier because he could really go off and have a big game if they're focused on Evans, stopping Evans.
Yeah, no, that's a great point there. Could have a massive game too. Plus, he's rotating inside and outside, so I think that's kind of big for Evans too, because the Lions, technically in the current iteration, I believe, have Brian Branch playing on the slot a lot, and so he's technically, I guess at this point their best corner or one of. So that makes sense to me that you probably don't want to be locking in the slot guy there specifically. But yeah, I agree. I think that if I differentiate elsewhere, I'll probably be putting in Evans because I do think he has the most upside. But if I don't, I think, like you said, a Godwin here, maybe a Cade Otton makes sense, especially if you think that they lose. He could certainly get enough. The usage there, I mean, he plays all the time. They just haven't really passed like a ton, and like he hasn't really been super involved. But now you have them, in my mind, I think they're going to pass 35, 40 times in this spot. He's going to see probably 5, 6, 7 targets.
And it is a weird, if you look at the tight ends remaining from these teams, if we're not taking, anybody from Packers, Ravens, 49ers, or the Texans, you might want to just plug, you could plug Otton in, and then you don't have to worry about the tight end spot. And that's kind of you're definitely going to be different with Otton at tight end. So
oh yeah,
that's an option.
Yeah. No, that's a great call there. And then I think the Lions have a little bit more, I don't know, value, I guess, at this point than I thought last week. So I think last week we're looking at Amon-Ra St. Brown as being like the massive chalk, and I believe he was. And then now we're in a spot where I think, what did he have? 12 catches against them last time. Basically, we know, we've heard this constantly throughout the week. The Bucs like to blitz. They blitz the Eagles over 60% of the time. The Jared Goff struggles against when teams blitz and get pressure. That's the key. They need to get pressure. When he was under pressure against the Bucs last time, completed 2 of 8 passes for 23 yards. But he also had his quickest time to throw of the season. He also had one of his lowest ADOTs of the season. So he's getting the ball out quick. Like they know that that's going to be the key there, which in my mind lines up pretty well with Amon-Ra St. Brown. But I think with Laporta a little bit healthier, I don't know how he played. I mean, that was unbelievable. But he looked spry. He was mostly a decoy, but when he caught the ball, he was moving pretty well. So I think he's a little bit more live than we thought last week. And then if you really want to get crazy, like if you think that the Lions lose, Jameson Williams, I don't think is completely outrageous. But I mean, we're looking at like a 1% play there. So like that's like you haven't differentiated anywhere else, and that's probably the move.
Yeah, Laporta ran 24 routes on 30 pass attempts for Goff. So he was pretty much out there. I think you mentioned about the blitz also plays into his hands. So this is he was only 1% owned because I think he, coming off the knee injury, nobody wanted to play him. 1.83% owned in the $200. That'll probably be a little bit higher. But I think Amon-Ra St. Brown will be the absolute chalk. He was at 78%. I would expect that to be pretty high, over 60% for sure. And this is a pass funnel Bucs defense. So I think you're kind of looking at those two, at least I am, in terms of who to play. And again, this is a tight end you could play. And 2-game sample, he might outscore Amon-Ra St. Brown. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I don't mind it. I think that's probably a solid look. We have another comment here in the chat from, I don't know, Dilly, I'm assuming. In the $200 full playoffs challenge, Evans was 43% owned, White 20%. You mentioned that. Lions pass is trash, so Evans feels like a play, but White catch a ton of checkdowns. Yeah, totally agree. I think that's pretty on par there. The interesting thing about the whole like players versus the blitz thing is because there's like 2 different routes that teams use. So like sometimes tight ends versus the blitz crush because they basically like chip and then like catch a quick pass. But sometimes they just max protect and then they just stay in and run like 5 routes. Happened with Cole Kmet plenty of times. Happened kind of with Dallas Goedert last week. Like he was just used to block a bunch. And then same with the running backs. Like we've seen it time and time again. Like sometimes running backs need to like run out for a quick pass. Sometimes they just like stay in and block. And so deciding which one that's going to be, I don't know. I haven't looked into it enough, but I think that could be pretty key here for seeing what we get from this Lions team. Jahmyr Gibbs also has been a lot better pass blocking as the season went on. So I would not be surprised to see more of him. But yeah, David Montgomery would be pretty unique here. The ceiling is very game script driven. Lions win, pound the rock type of game. That's tough, is because I don't see it being that type of game here against the Bucs with, top 5 in run D DVOA over the last 5 weeks. They're just like really coming into their form run D wise. And we saw, what was it in the first time they played, Goff had 43 pass attempts and they won 20-6. David Montgomery got hurt early. Jahmyr Gibbs didn't play, but even before that, they had 12 dropbacks, 7 rush attempts. So I think they were already kind of skewing that way as is.
I just want to mention on the routes run for Laporta, because you're talking about whether or not he might stay in and block. Right. He has not run, other than his injury game against Minnesota, he has not run less than 22 routes this season. So they have him running routes for the most part. They're not using him to block, which is probably smart. So I think he's like my favorite, differential play. And then St. Brown's the obvious smash, but I can't get behind the 2 running backs because of the matchup. I just think that the way that they're going to move the ball is through the air. But
yep. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, yeah, like even Jahmyr Gibbs seems thin because it's not like he's been a consistent producer in the receiving game. Like he's been really hit or miss. Like some games they very clearly make it a priority. Some games they don't give a shit. Like they just, whatever, he runs a couple routes, maybe he throws it to him, maybe they don't, but he's not like their main go-to guy here. So yeah, I think that's probably the play here. Laporta could be getting some good leverage. All right. Last game, Chiefs, Bills. This game's exciting. We're looking at the Chiefs right now as 3-point underdogs. One of the last, few times that Mahomes is an underdog in the playoffs or just at all in his career. In my one lineup right now, I have Patrick Mahomes in the lineup because I think that the Chiefs are going to win. And I think that they can probably run the ball, but I think we both thought that they were going to come out pounding the rock the entire game. And they did not last week against Miami in frigid weather against a team that has not been super good against defending the run. I mean, they came out and threw it over 40 times with Mahomes, and like they ran the ball at the end, but I mean, they're already up. So it was one of those things where maybe it's just Patrick and maybe it's just the Chiefs saying, unless this is like the worst running team defense in the league, we're just going to pass the ball whenever we want. And so I think that we could see decent production from Mahomes. And if they win, I think you're really live here with a contrarian quarterback where Josh Allen and Lamar are probably going to be the two highest owned. So I think that's viable. But, we saw Rashee Rice go off at like 8%, 10% last week. We did discuss that, which was awesome. I don't think I have him in my team that's the best right now in my other team. So, I guess I probably should have played 10 lineups, based on what we were talking about. Maybe could have gotten one with Puka, Aaron Jones, and Rashee Rice and all that. But where are you at with the Chiefs this week? Because I know you were pretty pro Pacheco last week.
And I still am. I think he's going to be a good play this week. But, if I would have known that he was going to be 38% owned and Rice was only going to be at 10%, I would have probably flipped that. But we also had that weird weather situation. And it looked like the Chiefs just didn't care. Like they just came out
0%.
Yeah, they did not DGAF about the temperatures, which was like, wasn't it like the coldest game? Like,
yeah, one of the coldest games, like ever. I mean, it was like -30 with the wind chill. It was -28 with wind chill in Chicago a couple days later, and I spent less than 5 minutes outside. I was like, I don't know how these people are functioning. And I had all the tough guys in my mentions. I tweeted out, I had tough guys in my mentions being like, oh, well, they're not soft like you, like they're, I'm like, all right, grow up.
But
Classic Twitter.
You did see it with some drops in the game. Like there was Kelsey dropped a couple that he normally would catch, and you did see it affect it, but they just didn't care. They just kept throwing until they figured it out, and I think that totally threw off the defense. So I think right now I'm thinking Pacheco, but this is a place where the Bills are one where you can definitely get some variation because you've got the most likely player is going to be Josh Allen, and then that's probably the chalk, and then you've got Diggs, Cook on that side of the ball, Kincaid. So when you're looking at the Chiefs, it's like, do you go Kelsey as the tight end in a kind of a weird year for tight end? Like right now, I discussed this earlier. Is like who we play at tight end because that's the one spot you have to fill in, other than quarterback and Rice, Pacheco. I think those are your three options as pass catchers, and then Mahomes is interesting. So you have gone, you got a one Allen lineup and you got one Lamar lineup in the first round.
Yep.
But now you kind of think Mahomes is going to make the Super Bowl, or he's going to at least get to the AFC Championship game.
Yeah, I mean their defense is just playing awesome. I mean they have a running game. Like I'm very, the more and more that I break it down this game, I like the Chiefs. So I think that they win here, and then I mean I think that they're as good as the Ravens and better than the Texans. So I don't know.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think this both these teams is where you get some variation. So for me, I'm looking at Pacheco again. I just feel like his workload is the safest, but we saw last week how Rice's upside in any given week is significantly higher, despite the weather. I mean, we're gonna have another cold game, but it's not gonna be quite as terrible as it was in Kansas City.
Yeah, we got a comment here. In a Bills lose scenario, dare I say Shakir? I will say Gabe Davis is out. Stephon Diggs, the Chiefs are allowing the fewest yards per game to opposing wide receiver ones. Only two wide receiver ones have even cleared 63 yards against them. And that was Devontae Adams and Amon-Ra, who had 73, 71 yards. They held Tyreek on well under. They held Stephon Diggs himself, even without L'Jarius Sneed previously. So there's a lot of different ways where I think that maybe it's the ancillary guys for the Bills that are getting there. Maybe it's a Dalton Kincaid. Maybe it's a Khalil Shakir. I think that you would have to play the rest of the chalk and then play Shakir because I don't think that – it's super, super contrarian. I would say probably sub 1% is what you're talking about there. So if you really need to, I prefer to differentiate elsewhere, but I think my lineup's also a little bit wild too. So, I totally understand that you might need to get a little bit weird here. But looking at the Bills, I think both that you and I were interested in James Cook before. This Kansas City team, like, they're a run funnel. Like, their pass defense is awesome, second in success rate. Their run defense is like bottom 5 to 10 in most metrics, depending on what you're looking at from a efficiency standpoint. And so I think that the Bills kind of come out and run the ball a bunch, like we saw almost against Dallas, like trying to negate some of the edges that maybe pressure or pass defense can force. And like last time these teams played, we saw 40 something pass attempts from both teams. But I could easily see Joe Brady being like, this is the strength of our team at this point. We're going to lean into the run and try and dominate there. So I could see just like a pretty mild game from Josh Allen here, whereas I think James Cook could maybe have a touchdown or two. But Josh Allen's just such a threat in the red zone, with his legs. Like, it's kind of tough to get away from that. But I will be fading Diggs. I don't know. What did you say you're having here? Do you have Cook or do you have Diggs?
This is one of those where I'm still deciding, trying to see if, I kind of lean Cook based on what you're saying. They are a run funnel, the Chiefs. And if you're looking at the Ravens in the AFC Championship game and you think that the Bills are going to win, then Cook should have a good game against the Ravens as well. That, as we mentioned, maybe touchdowns maybe not as important. You can get one maybe catching the ball. I don't know, but if you don't have Josh Allen to pick from, it's a little dicey. I think Kincaid is interesting, and I would rather play Kincaid to differentiate than Shakir. But he's chalkier. I'm sure with Njoku off the board, Goddard off the board. Those are two of your top 3. So you've got Kelsey likely, and then Kincaid are the next 3 probably, unless you've got Kittle or Laporta. Laporta might jump up. So I'm just trying to think about who would be the Kincaid I had in there for a while in my lineup. I've been kind of moving things around as we've been talking, and I pulled him right now for Laporta, and that leads me to Cook, I think, for the Bills, but.
Yeah, I think Kincaid's solid too. It's interesting because I think that the Chiefs have been really good against tight ends this year off the top of my head, but the way that they're using Kincaid is not like really a standard tight end. They kind of use him in like a big slot. They move him around a little bit. He runs deeper routes sometimes, at least lately. So his current usage that we've seen has been outstanding, especially from an ADOT perspective. Even with Dawson Knox, I think that was a little bit of a scare there. And we saw his role decrease for a couple of weeks when he came back. But now in the playoffs, they're letting him loose. I mean, it makes sense. If you're going to draft a guy that high, if you're going to, he's one of the best talents on the team at this point. So he's got to be used as such. So I think he's viable as a contrarian play here. Again, Diggs also didn't practice yesterday, limited today with an ankle issue. I mean, he might have sub 30 yards. I mean, I know it's outrageous, but I really just don't think he saw a massive target share last week, but it was all like super low ADOT stuff. So he had like 7 for 52, last week. So I think that if he does get there, it would have to be like with a touchdown or 2 for Diggs to get there. So for me, that's go for it.
Yeah, I just want to mention Shakir, 3 for 31, a touchdown on 3 targets. So he was super efficient with a small role. Kincaid, 3 for 59 and a touchdown on 6 targets. And in the last 2 regular season games, he went over 80 yards receiving. So he's going to be chalkier than Shakir, but I think that's the pivot. If you're looking at one of these skill players, don't want to use Cook, and you don't want to use Diggs, I think he's the better play, especially, given the tight end situation at this point.
For sure. Do you have a lineup built that you want to share? I can share mine too first if you're still going through it. You don't have to do it. And I think it's still kind of in flux, right?
Yeah, it's still kind of in flux, and if this is the winning lineup, I don't want to give it off, give it over the air. But I think you guys could kind of piece together where I'm at with it. Some of the chalk on Saturday, and then using those 2 games on Sunday to try to differentiate.
Yeah, for sure. And as you guys know, I'm getting a little bit wild here with maybe some, other Baltimore players not picking, Lamar or Josh Allen at quarterback. But again, I also already have one of those teams each from my previously. So it's kind of a hedge, kind of just a different approach here where I feel pretty good about if I was wrong earlier, I should be right here, at least in some spots. And I think it'll put me in a pretty good spot here to potentially win some money. So, all right, before we hop off, we are going to build a prize pick slip here. A lot of it's already what we talked about, but I do think that there are some good spots. And if you guys want to tail, make sure to go to prizepicks.com/accurate. You get a first deposit match up to $100. Super easy. I mean, there's a reason that Prize Picks is doing more handle than sports books in some states. I mean, just super easy platform. But let's start by building a slip here. I think your first one is with the Bucks here with the Rashad White, right?
Yeah, the over-under on his receiving yards is 22.5. He's averaged 32.3 this year. He's missed that number in 2 straight. But before that, he hit it in 4 straight and in 11 of 17 regular season games. And this is also, probably a bet that the Lions are going to lead in this one, which I would think would be the case. And, the Bucks are going to have to throw more than they would like to. And he should get some dump offs and should be able to clear this number, 22.5. Seems low.
Nice. Yeah, no, I kind of agree there. It's one of those things that I haven't looked super, super hard into, but I do think is definitely the right side here, especially considering, I mean, like, you just can't take, I don't think, any unders in that game because, like, we might just see like 40 plus pass attempts from both quarterbacks. That, like, legit would not surprise me. In which case, like, any volume under you're betting is basically dead. You have way less chance there. So I think the over there is probably the right look. My first one, we touched on it a little bit earlier. I like Jaden Reed over 3.5 receptions. I mean, he literally hit this in 8 straight games prior to last week where the Packers played a lot of 12 personnel. I mean, they just ran the ball a bunch. I think Jordan Love only had 21 pass attempts too. So, like, of course, he's going to have, Jaden Reed's going to have some bad games, but in a game where I think it'll be at least borderline, they will not be in positive game script. Like, if they are in as much positive game script as they were against the Cowboys, the Packers probably win in the Super Bowl. I mean, that's where it's at. So yeah, I think he probably sees 5-6 plus targets here in this spot, as long as they're throwing the ball, which I expect them to as well. So yeah, I think that here at 3.5 is a little bit too short considering what we've seen from him, like a massive sample. It just seems like an overreaction to have 3.5 here instead of 4.5.
Yeah, and the third one for our play, which I know you're not like endorsing as an actual play, but 87.5 Russian receiving yards for Aaron Jones. I mean, he's gone over this number 4 straight games, 120, 127, 120, 111. That's just rushing yards in the last 3, not counting the playoff game. Obviously, I don't have that number off the top of my head here. It looks like he had 118. So he's clearing it just with rush, or he has. Now, the 49ers are a different animal, but you did mention you had some 49er numbers in terms of the rush defense is not as great as people think.
Yeah, it was like 20th in rushing success rate or something like that. I'll double check that right now, but it was not. I mean, it's relatively underwhelming.
Yeah, and I think it's partly because they have the fewest. Yeah, they had the fewest rush attempts regular season against them. It's because they're jumping out to positive game script and having the other team having to play catch up. I think that the Packers are running the ball really well. They're going to stick with it, even if they get down a touchdown or two. And even if they do abandon the run, he has the ability to, get this in one play as a receiver. Obviously that'd be a freaky play, but he will be involved no matter what the game script is. I think he'll be involved as a receiver as well. So I like it at 87.5. I think that's an easy number for him to hit if he's continuing to get 20 plus touches per game.
Yeah, no, it's not something that I love because I don't love betting running back overs, but with the receiving component, I think that's like the key there is that, it's kind of neutral. I mean, they're going to try and run the ball at first. Like I definitely think that that's going to be kind of their focal point. I expect the Niners to put a lot of pressure on them to pass eventually. And so that's kind of skewed my thoughts to make it a little more fragile, but I do think that the receiving component is massive. Like if they fall behind, I mean, Aaron Jones could have like 50 receiving yards. And so getting there on the ground and 35, 40 rushing yards is still nothing, even if they fall behind. So I think that's a good look. I double checked the stat. Niners are 24th in rushing success rate allowed this season, including the wild card weekend. Again, Cowboys were last heading into last week. So I think that the Niners have been better as of late, like post bye. I think that's probably where I grabbed the 20th from, just because, they're getting a little bit healthier. They, just started playing a little bit better, but I think that's, it's an interesting look. I think if the Packers are able to keep it close, like probably be on the back of Aaron Jones.
Yeah, they had 49ers coming off of basically a 2-week bye, right? So they're healthy,
yeah.
But are they going to be rusty? Fingers crossed.
Yeah, it's been a while. I mean, it's certainly interesting. One last bit on the Baltimore section here. The last time that we saw Lamar off of a bye, 10-point favorites at home against the Titans.
Oh,
lost
no.
outright by 14.
Oh.
I mean, it's a different scenario. Obviously, the Titans are not the Texans, things like that. The Niners and Packers, maybe not direct comparisons there, but we've seen it before. I mean, teams like you don't play in a game situation. Maybe you're a little bit rusty for a quarter or so. I don't know. Could happen. All right. Well, before I didn't, prep you for this, but before you log off, you got a Super Bowl pick for us? Like, who's going to be in the Super Bowl, like as it stands today?
Well, my brain is telling me Ravens, 49ers. All year they've been the class of their respective conferences. But my heart, now I'm gonna go Packers, and I'm gonna go
Love it.
with the Chiefs. What a matchup
Love
that
it.
would that be? Yeah, I'm going to go with your Patrick Mahomes wins at Buffalo, and then either hosts the Texans or wins at Baltimore. So let's do that.
Yep. Yeah, love it. That's a lot of fun. I'm gonna go with Niners and Chiefs. So pretty close there. But
Boo!
I know. The Niners are just so good. I mean, it's just maybe
What?
maybe I'm sipping the Kool-Aid too much, but I don't know. I thought the Cowboys were pretty good too, and they totally just
Packers money line. Packers money line.
Oh, amazing. Awesome. Well, appreciate you guys all tuning in. John, a lot of fun again. Don't think we're going to be doing this again because there are no more contests, but maybe do some more shows in the coming weeks for some prize picks only stuff, things of that sort here. As always, great time. And you can find us on Twitter at 44football, at 44john, at Connor Allen NFL. Thanks, guys. Bye.